What if the Persian Empire had conquered Greece? If the Persians had triumphed at Marathon, would democracy have ever been born? The question hangs in the air like an unsheathed blade. Ancient history turns not on decades, but on moments. Moments like a single Athenian spear piercing the breastplate of a Persian immortal on the dusty plain of Marathon in 490 BCE. Moments like the sudden flight of a warhorse, spooked by a roar from the hoplite ranks. Moments like a messenger running to Athens with blood in his sandals and death in his breath. But what if that moment, the Greek victory at Marathon, had never happened? Let us begin where the real world did, with the fire-breathing ambition of Darius I, King of Kings, Lord of the four corners of the earth. The Persian Empire in the early 5th century BCE stretched from the Indus Valley in the east to the Aegean in the west, from the Caucasus to the deserts of Arabia. It was not only the largest empire the world had ever known, it was the most sophisticated, efficient, and terrifying. And yet, despite all its wealth and grandeur, the empire could not tolerate the rebellion of a cluster of tiny city-states along the eastern Mediterranean. The Greeks, chaotic, quarrelsome, and poor, had dared to meddle in Persian affairs during the Ionian Revolt. Darius, insulted beyond reason, sent his army west across the sea. His target, Athens. In our history, the Athenians met the Persians at Marathon and won a shocking victory, halting the Persian advance and setting the stage for the rise of Greek democracy, philosophy, and culture. But let us shift the sands beneath our feet. Let us imagine that the gods tilted the balance slightly differently. In our alternate timeline, the battle at Marathon ends in ruin for the Greeks. The Persian general Datis employs a feigned retreat, drawing the eager Athenian center forward, overextending their line. Hidden cavalry units crash into the flanks, while archers unleash a hail of arrows that blackens the sky. The Athenian hoplites fight valiantly, but discipline falters. The line breaks. The Persian immortals push forward with cold, methodical precision. Blood runs on the sand, and the sun sets on the broken shield of Athens. The city of Athens burns. Darius does not stop there. With Athens in ashes, Sparta, leader of the Peloponnesian League and Athens's primary rival, prepares for war. But Persia, unlike the clumsy empires that came before, does not simply attack. It corrupts. Gold flows like wine into the pockets of Spartan ephors and Theban generals. One by one, the Greek city-states are turned or crushed. Some resist, but without Athens as a rallying cry, they fall. Within a decade, the entire Greek world has been subsumed into the Persian satrapy of Ionia. And in this new world, one without a free Athens, there is no golden age of Pericles. There is no Socrates questioning the foundations of truth in the Agora, no Plato dreaming of a republic, no Aristotle to teach Alexander. But the changes ripple far beyond the Aegean. Persia now holds the entire eastern Mediterranean under one banner. With the Aegean secured, Darius's successor, Xerxes, turns his gaze toward the west. Not with desperation as he once did, but with confidence. With naval bases in Crete and the Cyclades, the Persian fleet grows to dwarf any rival. Carthage trembles. Rome is but a fledgling village, unknown, irrelevant. The balance of power that shaped Europe begins to bend eastward. Yet beneath the golden mask of Persian domination, cracks form. The Greeks, now subjects, do not forget their past. Whispers of freedom begin to stir from the mountains of Arcadia and the alleyways of Corinth. Some dream not of submission, but of resurrection. As we leave this first chapter, the Persian sun rises high over the Mediterranean, unchallenged. But the ideas of liberty, once kindled, do not easily die. What happens when an empire conquers the land, but not the mind? The year is 480 BCE, but this is not the world you know. A black and gold standard, bearing the image of Ahura Mazda, flutters above the Acropolis. Below, marble temples have been recarved, not destroyed, for Persia appreciates beauty, but rebranded. The goddess Athena remains in stone, but beside her now stands Darius the Great, his hand outstretched not in piety, but in dominion. The Parthenon, that future marvel of classical civilization, is never built. In our new timeline, Greece has become a satrapy, one of many provinces in the sprawling Persian Empire. It is called Hellas, a name that once spoke of defiance and unity in our world, but here it is merely an administrative term, like Lydia or Cilicia. Governed by a satrap appointed in Susa, the region is kept in line with a combination of velvet and steel, tax incentives, religious tolerance, Persian coinage, and rows of archers lining the agora. The Greeks adapt, but uneasily. The Persians do not outlaw the local cults, nor do they enforce Zoroastrianism. Religious coexistence has always been a hallmark of Achaemenid strategy. However, subtle shifts take root. The oracle at Delphi is silenced, not by decree but by neglect. Pilgrimages decline as the Persian postal road system routes commerce through Sardis and Ecbatana instead. Temples still burn incense, but fewer people kneel before the gods. Democracy in Athens is gone. In its place, a client oligarchy runs city affairs, always under the watchful eye of a Persian military governor. The Boule, once a place of impassioned debate, is now a rubber stamp. Dissent is not shouted. It is whispered. Sparta, that ancient military machine, fares better. It had always loathed Athenian democracy and finds common cause with Persian autocracy. In exchange for military cooperation and loyalty, the Persians allow the Spartan kings a degree of autonomy. In time, Sparta becomes a kind of imperial enforcer, Greek in tongue, but Persian in policy. Education shifts. Without the intellectual freedom of democratic Athens, philosophy becomes stunted. Pythagoras dies in obscurity. No Socratic method is ever born. The agora, once a crucible of debate, is now a market watched over by Medes and Parthians. And yet, beneath this surface calm, the fire smolders. Greek resistance does not vanish. It adapts. It becomes myth, poetry, song. Tales of the Marathon betrayal and the fall of liberty pass in hushed tones among shepherds and fishermen. Children grow up hearing the names of Leonidas and Miltiades not as distant ancestors, but as symbols of a stolen future. Some Greeks rise in Persian favor. Alcibiades, instead of becoming the flamboyant general of the Peloponnesian War, becomes a cunning satrap loyal to Susa. Herodotus, the father of history, writes not of Greek glory, but of imperial virtue. His scrolls carefully curated, his travels sanctioned, and yet, in the highlands of Epirus and the islands of the Aegean, a different generation is rising. They are not philosophers, but warriors. Not citizens, but rebels. Their allegiance is not to Athens or Sparta, but to a dream that their parents barely dared to remember, a dream of Greece. As the 470s BCE roll in, the Persian Empire faces a new problem. Not a rival army, but a rival idea. An idea it had once crushed at Marathon, burned in Athens, and buried beneath tribute and bureaucracy, but which now rises again in whispers and shadows. Ideas, after all, are harder to conquer than cities. And the empire does not stand still. With Greece secured, Xerxes, the son of Darius, sees further. In our real history, he invaded Greece with a massive force and was ultimately turned back at Salamis and Plataea. In this timeline, there is no need for that. Instead, he turns west. The Persian navy, now anchored in Delos and Corinth, begins patrolling the Adriatic. Messengers are sent to the Etruscans in Italy. Treaties are drawn with Carthaginian merchants in North Africa. The balance of the Mediterranean begins to shift. Slowly, methodically, irreversibly. The empire has no equal now, only a horizon. But even empires must look back. Behind its chariot of conquest, the empire drags the broken bodies of ancient civilizations, Egypt, Babylon, and now Greece. As this part of our journey ends, a storm is gathering in the western sky. Across the Ionian Sea, the tribes of Latium grow restless. The city of Rome, still young and brutish, begins to look eastward with wary eyes. And back in Athens, beneath the heel of the empire, a boy with a sharp mind and sharper tongue is about to ask a forbidden question. What is justice? He was born in the shadows of an empire, not the proud sunlit hills of democratic Athens, but a city subdued, filtered through Persian silence. His name, in our world, would have been Socrates. But in this world, he is never allowed to speak freely. In the agora, there is no agora, not in the old sense. It is a market, yes, but no longer a forum for ideas. Instead, conversations are monitored. Language bends subtly to imperial preference. Words like freedom, citizen, and logos, these are carefully watched. Still, some minds cannot be silenced by force. Young Socrates, the son of a stonemason, grows up amid Persian marble and Persian propaganda. He sees Achaemenid satraps parading through the streets, their servants throwing coins to the poor, their scribes recording taxes in Aramaic. He hears the speeches of appointed governors, carefully translated into Greek, extolling the harmony of order, obedience, and the great king's divine justice. But something does not sit right in his soul. He begins to ask questions, first in private, then in whispers. Why do men obey? What is virtue if it is not chosen? Is a just man still just if he has no freedom? In another life, he might have stood in the open sun, surrounded by pupils, challenging them with riddles and irony. Here, he teaches in cellars. He writes nothing, for writing is dangerous. His method survives only in memory, passed from mouth to mouth, through secret gatherings held in the ruins of temples the empire forgot. Persia, for all its might, cannot completely erase the Greek mind. The empire senses this unrest. It has conquered land, wealth, and tribute, but not hearts. The satraps request stronger garrisons. The royal court in Susa debates a difficult question. How far should tolerance go? If the Greeks cannot be made to forget who they were, should they be made to forget who they are? In the year 450 BCE, Socrates is arrested. Not for treason, not for rebellion, but for impiety and spreading subversive philosophy. His followers plead for mercy, offering bribes, connections, gold. But Persia does not deal in chaos. It deals in warnings. He is executed quietly, without spectacle. A cup of hemlock, a sealed tomb. No trial, no apology. But the idea has already escaped the body. His disciples scatter. One sails to Syracuse, another flees to Alexandria. One finds refuge in the mountains of Macedonia, where whispers say a warlord is gathering mercenaries to resist Persian rule. His name? Philip of Macedon. And so the idea migrates. Even as Greece is bent under imperial weight, seeds are carried elsewhere, across seas, over mountains, into new soils. In Anatolia, the remnants of Ionian cities speak of old freedoms. In Egypt, Greek merchants fund schools that teach forbidden ideas. In the Black Sea colonies, traders use coded language to preserve ancient dialogues. Back in Persia, Xerxes dies, and his successor, Artaxerxes, ascends. He is shrewd, elegant, and brutal. His spies report growing unrest in Hellas, in Thrace, and disturbingly, among the Medes themselves. The empire has grown too vast. It needs not only roads and taxes, but belief. To forge that belief, Artaxerxes begins a cultural purge. Greek texts are confiscated. Temples are converted to imperial shrines. Education is centralized under Persian supervision. The Persian language becomes mandatory in all administrative institutions. A new calendar is introduced. Greek identity is to be diluted, slowly, without fire, but with relentless time. Yet even as scrolls burn, minds remember. A secret network of scholars emerges, men and women who commit entire dialogues, epics, and mathematical treatises to memory. They meet under the guise of religious rituals or trade guilds. They pass down Pythagoras' numbers and Heraclitus's paradoxes like sacred rites. In their minds, the lost Athens still breathes. Meanwhile, Rome awakens. No longer a mere village on the Tiber, Rome is now a republic with aspirations. In our history, It feared Carthage and eyed Greece as a land of philosophers and spoils. But in this world, Rome sees the East not as inspiration, but as warning, a monolithic empire that devours identity, a power that must, eventually, be challenged. Rome begins preparing. It reforms its legions. It allies with the Gauls. It opens trade routes not just for goods, but for information. In captured Greek sailors, Roman consuls find more than navigators. They find tutors. And in one dim corner of a Roman villa, a young senator reads a scroll copied by hand, carried from a ruined temple in Athens. The scroll begins, "The unexamined life is not worth living. The Persian Empire, vast and proud, still reigns, but for the first time, it is no longer certain. Not because of armies, because of questions. In the northern highlands, where Persian messengers rarely tread and taxes arrive late or never at all, a different Greece survives, feral, proud, and waiting. This is Macedonia, not the refined land of philosophers and marble columns, but a rugged frontier ruled by kings who drink with their soldiers and bury enemies beneath cairns of stone. The Achaemenids never truly tamed it. It was too wild, too poor, and, until recently, too irrelevant. But that is changing. In the year 382 BCE, a boy named Philip is born into the court of King Amyntas III. In our history, he is destined to be father to Alexander the Great. In this world, the stage is different, but the fire in his blood burns the same. Philip grows up hearing two kinds of stories. The first are from Persian envoys, tales of order, wealth, and the divine glory of the King of Kings. The second are whispered from his tutors, half-hidden men who once studied under Socrates and Pythagoras, now fugitives. They speak of the old Athens, of freedom, of logic, of the soul. They tell of how Greece once stood defiant and how it fell. And they do not whisper these stories to mourn, but to inspire. By 20, Philip is already a commander. He studies Persian military tactics not to emulate them, but to defeat them. He observes their disciplined cavalry, their elite immortals, their layered supply networks. And then he trains his own army differently, harder, leaner, more mobile. He replaces tribal warbands with phalanxes of steel, trains his officers to think, and drills his infantry until they move like one body with a single mind. While Persia's satraps grow fat on tribute and indulge in court politics, Philip builds a war machine. By 359 BCE, he is king. And his first move is not against Persia, but Greece. The city-states, long divided, have grown resentful under Persian rule. Corinth, Argos, Thebes, they grumble but dare not rebel. Philip offers them something new, not just freedom, but vengeance. He rides south with speed and fury, not as a liberator, but as a storm. He defeats Persian garrisons, co-ops local militias, and proclaims a pan-Hellenic league, not as a romantic vision of unity, but as a military alliance forged in necessity. By 350 BCE, he controls all of mainland Greece. Susa reacts too slowly. Persia had ruled these lands for generations. They thought them pacified, obedient. But the rebellion spreads faster than couriers. One satrap is assassinated in Delphi. Another flees Corinth. Ships from Lesbos and Rhodes abandon their imperial contracts and side with Philip. His army swells with Greek veterans who have waited a lifetime to rise again. Artaxerxes III sends troops, but they are divided. Some are loyal, others hesitate, and some Greek auxiliaries within the Persian ranks defect mid-battle, turning the tide at the siege of Ephesus. The Achaemenid illusion of invincibility begins to crack. Then Philip does something unthinkable. He crosses the Hellespont. No longer content with liberating Greece, he invades Asia Minor, the heartland of Persian power. His armies sweep through Lydia and Phrygia like wildfire. The great cities of Sardis and Halicarnassus, once Persian jewels, fall to the iron phalanx. But this is no conquest of plunder. Philip has a vision. He has seen how Persian rulers maintain their empire, with roads, tribute, and bureaucracy. And so he adapts. He does not burn cities. He repurposes them. He installs Greek administrators, keeps local satraps who pledge fealty, and adopts parts of the Persian system, only leaner, swifter, uncorrupted by decadence. Persia, now caught between rebellion in the west and pressure from nomadic raids in the east, finds itself stretched thin. Artaxerxes orders conscription across Babylonia and Bactria, weakening internal trade. Rumors spread of famine in Susa, of plots in Persepolis. The empire is too large to move quickly, and Philip moves like thunder. But fate is cruel. In 336 BCE, Philip is assassinated by a disgruntled noble during a festival in Sardis. His son, only 20 years old, ascends the throne. The boy is brilliant, charismatic, and utterly relentless. His name is Alexander. In our world, he would go on to conquer Persia. But in this world, he does something different. He inherits not a united Macedon on the edge of Greece, but a nascent Hellenic empire already pushing deep into Asia. He is not merely a challenger to Persia. He is its shadow, its reflection, its undoing. As we end this chapter, Alexander stands on the banks of the Halys River, staring east, toward the heart of the greatest empire the world has ever seen. His generals ask, "What now, my king?" And Alexander smiles. Now we teach them what it means to fight for an idea. The morning mist curled over the Anatolian plains as two civilizations stared across the field at one another, one born in palaces of opulence, the other in the dust of rebellion. It is the year 334 BCE. Alexander of Macedon, only 22 years old, commands a hardened army forged in fire by his father. He faces the satrapic hosts of Persia, well-equipped, numerous, but fractured. An empire grown too confident, too large, too slow to recognize that the tide of history had already begun to turn. At the river Granicus, they meet. In our timeline, this was Alexander's first major victory. Here, in our alternate history, the stakes are even higher, for Alexander is not just challenging Persia's western frontier. He is challenging the very idea that the great king is invincible. The Persian army is larger, their cavalry more numerous, but they do not understand what they face. Alexander leads not just soldiers, but believers. Greeks who had spent decades under Persian rule, now reborn under a single banner. His officers are former rebels, his lieutenants the sons of philosophers and freedom fighters. His tactics are fluid, precise, adapted from years of study and reimagining the very battles their ancestors lost. The Persians fight with pride, but pride cannot replace loyalty. When the satrap Mithranes hesitates at a critical moment, believing reinforcements are coming from the east, Alexander strikes. His companion cavalry pierces the center like a lance through cloth. The Persian left wing collapses, the right holds longer, but then word spreads that Sardis has fallen. The momentum is irreversible. Victory is total. But Alexander does not celebrate. He knows better than most. Persia is not defeated in a single battle. It is an idea spread across deserts, mountains, and rivers, written into the tablets of Babylon and whispered in the temples of Zoroaster. To kill the empire, he must cut out its heart. He pushes east. One by one, cities fall. Not to flame, but to awe. Alexander, unlike his father, understands symbols. He treats the conquered Persians with respect. He offers terms, allows local customs, even wears Persian robes in ceremony, not as submission, but as integration. He is not trying to destroy Persia. He is trying to become something greater. At Issus, Darius III finally takes the field. He brings with him the full wrath of the empire, tens of thousands of infantry, scythed chariots, a royal entourage stretching for miles. His army outnumbers Alexander's nearly 2-1. But numbers are not destiny. Alexander identifies the flaw immediately. The Persians have massed their center too heavily, leaving their left vulnerable against the sea. He maneuvers with blinding speed, pinning the center, then slamming into the flank with his phalanx and cavalry in perfect tandem. Darius panics. He flees again. The empire's heart stutters, But it is what Alexander does next that truly cracks Persia's spine. He marches not to Persepolis, but to Babylon, to the cradle of kings, the jewel of Mesopotamia. And he enters not as a destroyer, but as a liberator. The priests of Marduk welcome him. The merchant houses open their vaults. He pays his soldiers well, restores temples that had fallen into disrepair, and issues a proclamation, one that reverberates across every satrapy from the Nile to the Oxus. From this day forward, there are no Persians and Greeks, only free men under the sky. It is unprecedented and dangerous. In Susa and Persepolis, the court reels. The noble families whisper of betrayal. Darius, now disgraced, is accused of weakness. Rival claimants emerge. The empire begins to fracture, not from without, but from within. Alexander exploits every crack. He sends emissaries to the eastern satraps, promising autonomy in exchange for allegiance. He offers trade deals to the Bactrians, marriages to Persian nobility, honors to former enemies. He makes war with one hand and diplomacy with the other. The result? A phenomenon not even his father foresaw. In less than 4 years, half of the Persian Empire is under his control, not as a foreign occupation, but as a synthesis. A new world forged in Greek fire and Persian gold. But the old order is not dead. In the east, in the shadow of the Hindu Kush, a coalition of Persian loyalists gathers. Among them are fire priests, elite cavalry units, and mercenaries from distant Scythia. They call themselves the Sons of the Sun, and they believe Alexander is the Antichrist of their faith, a foreign king who wears their robes but speaks of equality. They prepare for war, and Alexander, ever fearless, marches toward them. But this is no longer just a battle between men. It is a battle between visions of civilization, one rooted in hierarchy, order, and sacred kingship, the other in fluidity, merit, and a dream that the world can be ruled not by fear, but by possibility. As we close this chapter, Alexander stands at the threshold of Persia's final bastion. Behind him, a wave of change. Before him, fire and fanatics. And he knows, in the marrow of his bones, that what he conquers next will not just shape his empire, it will shape the world for 1,000 years. They called it the Plateau of Fire, an unforgiving expanse of scorched stone and wind-scoured dust, nestled between the cliffs of Parapamisadie and the glaciers of the Hindu Kush. For generations, Persian scouts whispered of it as a place where the gods did not walk, where only the stubborn and the damned survived. It is here that the last defenders of the old Achaemenid order have made their stand. The year is 330 BCE. Alexander stands before them with an army hardened by 10 years of conquest. His banners carry both the eagle of Macedon and the winged symbol of Ahura Mazda, blended now into a sigil not of dominance, but of synthesis. Behind him march men from every corner of the former empire: Greeks, Persians, Medes, Egyptians, even Indian elephants adorned with Hellenic bronze. But his enemy is not merely an army. It is an idea. The Sons of the Sun have gathered in secret for years. Zealots, aristocrats, disillusioned priests, and forgotten satraps who believed that Persia's fall was not a military defeat, but a cosmic error. To them, Alexander is a blasphemy made flesh, a foreigner defiling the divine order. Their banners bear the burning disk of Mithra, the eternal light, and their war cries invoke the sacred fire. This is not a campaign, it is a crusade. The armies face each other under a sky choked with smoke. Alexander rides the line personally, his presence magnetic, nearly divine. His men do not fight for plunder, they fight for the world they've begun to believe in. A world without submission, where Hellenic freedom and Persian elegance intertwine. The battle is brutal. The Sons of the Sun fight with fanatical precision. Their cavalry wheel with terrifying speed. Their infantry sing hymns as they die. They do not break. Alexander nearly falls during a charge when his horse is struck by a javelin. He rises, bloodied, grabs a standard, and leads the push himself. His men rally. The center holds, then cracks, then shatters. The fire priests burn their own camp rather than let it fall. By nightfall, the plateau is a field of smoke and silence. Alexander stands amid the ashes of the last Persian resistance, not triumphant, but somber. He has not just won a war, he has buried an epic. And now, he must build something entirely new. In the months that follow, Alexander does not return west. Instead, he rides east, into Bactria, Sogdiana, and beyond the Oxus River. His rule becomes less Macedonian, more imperial. He learns Aramaic, marries Roxana, daughter of a Bactrian noble. He establishes libraries in Persepolis, Babylon, and Ecbatana, staffed by both Greek philosophers and Persian magi. He summons architects from Athens and sculptors from Susa to design new cities, hybrids of agora and bazaar, of colonnade and ziggurat. Alexandria in Ariana, Alexandria on the Tigris, not just outposts, but experiments in unity. He reforms the satrap system, not to abolish it, but to purify it. Governors are chosen for talent, not birth. He sends Macedonian governors to India and Persian scholars to Egypt. Roads once built to extract tribute now carry ideas. He establishes a new coin, the heliodaric, bearing his likeness on one side, and the faravahar, symbols of Zoroastrianism, on the other. Trade surges, temples are repaired. For a brief, dazzling moment, it seems that history itself has exhaled, but peace is never permanent. Alexander's own men grow uneasy. The old Macedonian guard, veterans who bled with Philip, begin to resent the Eastern customs, the robes, the bowing, the merging of bloodlines. Some call it betrayal. In a drunken feast, one of his oldest generals, Clitus the Black, speaks against him, mocking the fusion of East and West. Alexander kills him with his own hand. The court is shaken. Alexander locks himself in his tent for 3 days. Not out of guilt, but of revelation. He realizes he cannot rule the old world with new ideas alone. If he is to hold this fragile empire together, he must do something greater than conquer. He must give them a shared future. And so, in 328 BCE, he summons representatives from every major culture within his domain. Greek scholars, Persian priests, Indian rajas, Egyptian scribes. In Babylon, at the heart of the ancient world, he declares his vision, not of a Greek empire or a Persian one, but of a cosmopolis, a universal city, not built of stone, but of laws, language, learning, where men of every tribe could rise by merit, not blood, where philosophy and religion meet not in war, but in dialogue, where empire does not erase identity, but elevates all. It is unprecedented, unreal, impossible. And yet, it begins. Slowly in scattered cities, in scrolls copied by hand, in children taught both Homer and Zoroaster, it begins. But not everyone accepts it. In the shadows of the eastern mountains, a new threat is rising. They are not remnants of Persia. They are not rebels from Greece. They are something else. Nomads, riders, unbound by empire or idea, and they are watching. As Alexander's dream stretches across continents, a new storm begins to gather just beyond its horizon. A storm that does not care for glory, philosophy, or unity, only conquest. They came like whispers on the wind, rumors first, then smoke, then hooves. Out in the easternmost reaches of Alexander's vast new empire, beyond the Oxus River, past the emerald valleys of Sogdiana and the jagged peaks of the Hindu Kush, lay a frontier he had yet to tame. There were no satraps here, no scrolls or temples, no cities that paid tribute, or armies trained in phalanx. There were only riders, Scythians, Sakas, Dahe, and stranger names still. Tribes that lived in the saddle, slept beneath stars, and counted wealth not in coin but in horses. They did not worship gods in marble or fire. They worshipped the sky, the hunt, the chaos of freedom. To them, Alexander's cosmopolis was not a dream. It was an abomination. His messengers were shot from their saddles. His traders returned stripped and broken. Even his scouts began to vanish. And then, one night, an entire outpost in Margiana disappeared, burned to ash, every soldier impaled in a circle, a single horse skull left atop a spear. It was a message. Alexander understood. In the spring of 326 BCE, he mounted what would become his final campaign, not a march of conquest, but of defense. Not toward Egypt, nor west to Rome, but east, into the chaos. He brought with him the best of his new empire: Macedonian veterans, Persian cavalry, Indian war elephants, engineers from Babylon, and a personal guard handpicked from every corner of his realm. This was not just an army, it was a symbol, a living banner of unity. But the steppe did not care. In the rolling plains of Transoxiana, the riders awaited. They moved like ghosts, never engaging directly, always testing, surrounding, vanishing. Their arrows darkened the sky. Their horses could run for days without water. Their warriors fought without fear of death, because they did not build cities. They had nothing to defend, only the wind at their backs. Alexander, ever the genius, adapted. He broke his columns into mobile units. He recruited rival tribes with promises of silver and marriage. He used terrain to trap, rivers to divide, fire to smoke them out. His engineers built mobile towers. His cavalry learned to ride light. And yet, for every victory, another tribe appeared. Wilder, more vicious, more unknowable. It was a different war, not a clash of empires, but of worlds. In the winter of 325 BCE, Alexander suffered his worst loss. In the Vale of Sirdaria, a coalition of steppe tribes led by the enigmatic chieftain, known only as Akar the Unbound, ambushed his supply lines. Hundreds died. His elephants stampeded in panic. His generals urged retreat. But Alexander would not bend. Instead, he did something no king of Persia or Greece had ever done. He parleyed. In a wind-swept ravine, under a neutral banner, he met with Akar. There were no scribes, no treaties, only two men, surrounded by guards who barely restrained their hate. Akar was gaunt, sun-darkened, wrapped in wolf pelts. His eyes burned with contempt. "You are not a king," he spat. "You are a shepherd of corpses. Cities are cages. You tie men with laws and call it peace." Alexander didn't flinch. "And you are a child of fire, burning the house you cannot build." They spoke for hours, and something strange happened. They began to understand one another, not in allegiance, but in essence. Two creatures born to lead. Neither civilized nor wild, but somewhere in between. They parted without peace, but without war. The border remained fluid, dangerous, but the riders did not strike again in force. Alexander turned back, not defeated, but changed. He realized his dream of a universal empire had limits, not geographical, but existential. There were peoples who would never be absorbed, only respected. And so, in the last years of his life, he began to draw not borders, but boundaries. Lines not to dominate, but to recognize difference. He returned to Babylon, weary but victorious. His empire stretched from the Nile to the Indus, from the Black Sea to the edges of the Gobi. But it was fragile, held together not by fear, but by will. His will. He began consolidating power. Drafted new laws that blended Hellenic clarity with Persian structure. Commissioned a library to hold every known language and thought. He gathered sages from Athens, magi from Media, scribes from Memphis, astronomers from India. He spoke of launching a council, a great synod of humanity, to govern together. He dreamed aloud of roads that would cross all continents, of peace through knowledge, of an empire not of marble, but of mind. But time, cruel and patient, had its own plans. In June of 323 BCE, Alexander fell ill. Fever consumed him. Some whispered poison. Others said the gods had reclaimed him. On his deathbed, surrounded by generals and philosophers, he was asked the question that would haunt history. To whom do you leave the empire? He is said to have whispered, to the strongest. But in this world, perhaps he said something else. Leave it, to all. And with that, the light of the world flickered. The lion of empire was dead, and the fate of the greatest civilization the earth had ever seen hung once more in the balance. When a man becomes a myth, his death becomes a prophecy. Alexander was more than a king. He was a symbol, a synthesis, a blade that carved the old world apart and stitched a new one from its remnants. But he was also mortal, and when that mortality asserted itself, in a darkened chamber of Babylon, in the stifling heat of a Mesopotamian summer, the empire he forged began to tremble. There was no clear heir. His son by Roxana was unborn. His generals, Ptolemy, Seleucus, Antigonus, Perdiccas, had each marched at his side, spilled blood under his banners, and whispered their own ambitions into the corners of his conquests. Now, they stood in uneasy silence, each wondering who among them would seize the dream. And so the dream fractured. At first, they tried to hold it together. A regency council was declared, ostensibly in the name of the unborn Alexander IV. Territories were divided temporarily: Seleucus in the east, Ptolemy in Egypt, Antigonus in Anatolia, and others scattered across the provinces. The capital would remain in Babylon, the center of the new world. But ambition does not share thrones. By 320 BCE, the Diadochi, Alexander's generals, had turned on each other, not out of hatred, not even out of greed, but out of belief that only one could be the rightful heir to a vision that had never been meant for just one man. War returned. Cities that once bore the Heliodaric standard were forced to choose sides. Persian nobles, having embraced Alexander's reforms, now found themselves under siege by Greek successors, who reverted to old forms of rule. Some satrapies tried to declare independence. Others pledged loyalty to distant powers, Rome, Carthage, even the steppes. And amidst it all, the cosmopolis began to unravel. Babylon, once the pulsing heart of Alexander's empire, became a battlefield. The great library he commissioned was looted, its scrolls scattered, burned, lost. The Council of Languages was dissolved. The Synod never convened, but even as the body of empire fractured, its soul lingered. In Alexandria, in Ariana, a school of astronomy continued recording lunar movements in both Greek and Aramaic. In Memphis, philosophers debated fate and reason in syncretic temples to Thoth and Apollo. In Persepolis, a magistrate preserved copies of the Heliocode, Alexander's proposed universal law, written in cuneiform, Greek, and Old Persian. And in the mountains of Cappadocia, a woman named Timandra, once a scribe in Alexander's personal court, began teaching children the languages of all four corners of the empire. Her goal was simple: preserve the possibility that such unity might live again. Meanwhile, the Diadochi Wars intensified. Ptolemy seized Egypt, declaring it the true heir of civilization. He embalmed Alexander's body in gold and housed it in a great mausoleum in Alexandria, turning the city into a beacon of learning and propaganda alike. Seleucus, shrewder, claimed Mesopotamia and much of Persia proper. He renamed Susa the City of Wisdom, married Persian nobility, and attempted to resurrect the mixed administration Alexander once envisioned, only now under his sole authority. Antigonus tried to restore order by force, carving through Anatolia with a ruthlessness that shattered entire provinces. The people, those who had once believed in the cosmopolis, were caught in between. In this alternate world, history becomes fragmented, not unlike our own. But the difference is this: the idea that Alexander awakened cannot be buried so easily. Greek becomes the language of administration from Bactria to Babylon. Zoroastrian rituals find their way into Egyptian temples. Indian medicinal knowledge is codified alongside Hippocratic treatises. Trade routes flourish not just with goods, but with stories. The world is no longer divided into East and West. It is entangled. Rome watches all this with wary fascination. The Republic is rising now, ambitious, austere, and deeply suspicious of monarchy. Yet even Rome cannot resist the gravitational pull of the fractured Hellenic-Persian synthesis. Roman merchants adopt the Daric for trade. Roman senators quote Heraclitus as copied by Babylonian scribes. And in secret chambers, Roman philosophers debate whether Alexander's dream was madness or destiny delayed. But back in Babylon, something stirs. It is 312 BCE. Seleucus has returned to reclaim the city after being forced out years earlier. He finds not a husk, but a whispering flame. Refugees, scribes, priests, teachers, all gathered around the ruins of Alexander's vision. They are poor, scattered, powerless, but they remember. They begin calling themselves the keepers of the Heliad, guardians of the cosmopolitan light. They do not fight with swords. They fight with memory. They begin reconstructing lost scrolls from oral tradition. They send emissaries to the corners of the broken empire, urging peace, knowledge, preservation. Most rulers ignore them, but some listen. One satrap in Parthia grants them land to build a school. A Greek general in Armenia funds a caravan of books to be copied. A merchant guild in Bactria adopts their creed, unity through understanding. They are not an empire, not even a nation, but they are a thread that somehow survives. As the century closes, the world stands divided once more. But beneath the politics and battlefields, in quiet rooms lit by oil lamps and guarded by conviction, something ancient and fragile remains. The belief that empire does not have to mean domination, that conquest can give way to connection, that the dream of Alexander, born in the ashes of a conquered Greece and matured in the ruins of a fallen Persia, might still, somehow, endure. Centuries pass, yet the echoes of Alexander's dream continue to ripple through the tapestry of history, not as a monolithic empire, but as a mosaic of cultures intertwined in unprecedented ways. Without the sharp division between East and West that marked our own history, the Mediterranean and Near East become a crucible for a unique civilization, a Helleno-Persian synthesis that alters the very fabric of society. In Alexandria in Egypt, now a bustling metropolis at the crossroads of continents, the fusion of Greek philosophy and Persian spirituality births new schools of thought. Temples dedicated to Zeus stand beside fire altars of Ahura Mazda. Scholars debate ethics blending Stoic reason with Zoroastrian dualism. This is a world where Plato's Republic meets the teachings of Zarathustra. Art and architecture follow suit. Cities no longer mimic the stark, rigid columns of classical Greece alone, nor the soaring, intricate palaces of Persepolis. Instead, the skyline blossoms with hybrid forms, colonnades that curve like Persian gardens, mosaics depicting both Greek heroes and Persian kings, theaters where Greek tragedies unfold alongside Zoroastrian rituals. Trade flourishes along the Silk Road, revitalized centuries earlier by the stability brought by the Helleno-Persian polity. Caravans ferry silk from the Chinese Han dynasty, spices from India, glassware from Phoenicia, and manuscripts from Athens, all weaving a network of exchange, not only in goods, but ideas and technologies. Education spreads beyond the elite. Public schools teach students to read both Greek and Old Persian scripts. Mathematics merges Euclidean geometry with Babylonian astronomy, producing early models of planetary motion centuries before Ptolemy. Medicine blends Hippocratic empiricism with Ayurvedic herbalism, healing diseases once thought incurable. Politically, the old city-state model fades. In its place, a system of regional councils arises, representing multiple ethnicities and languages, an embryonic federation balancing local autonomy with centralized coordination. This fusion of Persian satrapal governance with Greek civic participation becomes a prototype for later political thought. The empire's influence extends westward. Rome, growing in strength but more cosmopolitan than in our history, absorbs Helleno-Persian customs and laws. Roman senators debate not only Cicero, but Zoroaster. The Latin alphabet incorporates symbols inspired by Aramaic. Roads built by Roman engineers connect cities once unified by Persian royal highways, facilitating not only armies but ideas. In the East, Alexander's legacy shapes India's Mauryan Empire, fostering unprecedented diplomacy and cultural exchange. Buddhism and Helleno-Persian philosophies find common ground, enriching both traditions. However, this blending is not without tension. Conservative factions in both Greek and Persian societies resist the fusion. Traditionalists in Athens lament the fading of classical purity. Zoroastrian priests fear dilution of sacred rites. Sporadic revolts erupt in regions where ethnic pride resists imperial identity. Yet, the prevailing trend is one of coexistence. Religious tolerance becomes a foundational principle. Festivals celebrating multiple pantheons draw diverse crowds. Marriages between Greeks, Persians, Egyptians, and others weave complex social fabrics. The concept of citizen expands beyond ethnicity to encompass loyalty to shared ideals. Philosophers begin to articulate a universal ethics, a code blending reason, faith, and duty, laying intellectual groundwork centuries ahead of the Enlightenment. Even warfare changes. Professional armies incorporate diverse ethnic units, blending Greek phalanxes, Persian cavalry, and Indian war elephants. Military strategies emphasize cooperation and integration over domination. Diplomatic marriages seal alliances across continents. By the time the Roman Empire rises to dominance, it carries within it the DNA of this Helleno-Persian fusion, a legacy invisible yet indelible. In art, science, politics, and religion, the ancient world's duality dissolves into something new. A civilization that remembers conquest but chooses connection. As we look back on this alternate world, one question remains. How different would our modern conceptions of freedom, identity, and culture be if this synthesis had shaped history instead? Would the divisions that plague humanity today, East and West, tradition and progress, faith and reason, have found harmony instead? This is the world Alexander sought to build, forged in the ashes of a Persia that conquered Greece, only to be conquered by a dream. In this alternate world, the confluence of Greek inquiry and Persian scholarship ignites a renaissance centuries ahead of its time. Philosophers do not just debate the nature of existence, they build instruments to observe it. Inspired by the Persian astronomers who once charted the stars for kings, and the Greeks who sought to explain the cosmos through reason, new schools of science emerge. In Babylon, the great library founded by Alexander expands beyond texts to include observatories and laboratories. Scholars like Hypatia and Eudoxus, had they lived in this world, work side by side with magi versed in mathematics and astrology. Together, they develop refined models of planetary motion, predating Ptolemy's geocentric system by centuries. Medicine, too, leaps forward. The fusion of Hippocratic principles with Persian herbal knowledge and Indian Ayurvedic techniques creates comprehensive healing arts. Hospitals in Alexandria and Egypt serve patients of all ethnicities, where physicians study anatomy with precision and compassion. The concept of quarantine emerges in response to plagues, and sanitation systems improve urban health. Engineering projects reflect the empire's scope and ambition. Canals connect the Nile to the Euphrates, facilitating trade and irrigation. Roads stretch from the Aegean shores to the Indus Valley, maintained by a professional corps drawn from across the empire. Bridges built with a blend of Greek design and Persian innovation span rivers that once isolated peoples. In education, bilingual schools flourish. Students master Greek rhetoric and philosophy alongside Persian literature and law. This multilingual fluency fosters a generation capable of bridging cultural divides with ease, producing diplomats, scientists, and artists with a cosmopolitan outlook. Artistic expression flourishes in unexpected ways. Sculptors carve statues that blend Greek realism with Persian stylization, capturing both the idealized human form and symbolic motifs of divine kingship. Poetry and theater meld Greek drama with Persian epic traditions, performed in amphitheaters decorated with intricate mosaics and reliefs. This cultural flowering influences political thought. Philosophers revisit concepts of governance, combining Greek ideas of citizenship and debate with Persian notions of benevolent monarchy and divine justice. They develop hybrid political theories advocating for a balance of power between local autonomy and imperial unity. Religious pluralism shapes social cohesion. Temples and shrines dedicated to Zeus, Ahura Mazda, Isis, and even early Buddha stand side by side. Rituals incorporate elements from multiple faiths, fostering respect and understanding rather than conflict. Yet, this vibrant world is not without its challenges. Tensions occasionally flare between traditionalists and progressives. Some regions resist change, clinging to older ways and distrustful of the growing centralized authority. Internal rebellions erupt sporadically, but are often quelled through negotiation rather than conquest. The spread of knowledge creates new centers of power. Merchants, scholars, and artisans form influential guilds that advise rulers and shape policy. Universities emerge in cities like Persepolis, Alexandria, and Athens, attracting students from across continents. And all of this shapes the trajectory of human history in profound ways. Imagine the Renaissance igniting not in 15th century Europe, but in the 4th century BCE, fueled by this cross-pollination of cultures. Imagine scientific discoveries accelerating centuries earlier, setting the stage for technologies that, in our timeline, emerged only in the modern era. Imagine a world where the East-West divide was replaced by a shared pursuit of knowledge and enlightenment. Alexander's dream of a cosmopolis, a city of the world, becomes not just a political reality, but an intellectual and cultural beacon. As we stand on the threshold of this alternate future, one cannot help but wonder, how would our world be different if knowledge had flourished in this environment? Would our sciences, arts, and philosophies carry the imprint of this ancient fusion? Would humanity have found unity in diversity far earlier, shaping a more connected and compassionate civilization? The dawn of knowledge in this Helleno-Persian world is a testament to the power of synthesis, where conquest gives way to creation and empire becomes a cradle for civilization. In the centuries following Alexander's reign, the Helleno-Persian world became a vibrant mosaic, a tapestry woven from threads of diverse faiths, languages, and customs. The empire's vastness ensured that no single culture could dominate entirely. Instead, its strength lay in its multiplicity. Religious life flourished in a way the ancient world had rarely seen. Zoroastrianism, with its dualistic vision of light and darkness, found new life intertwined with Greek philosophical concepts of good and evil. Temples to Ahura Mazda stood alongside altars to Apollo and Athena, creating spaces where rituals blended the mysticism of Persia with the reason of Greece. Buddhism, traveling westward along the Silk Road earlier than in our timeline, found fertile ground within this cosmopolis. Its teachings on suffering and enlightenment resonated with Greek Stoic ideals, sparking philosophical dialogues and syncretic schools. In Egypt, the cult of Isis flourished, integrating elements from Persian fire worship and Greek mystery religions. These religious cross-currents fostered a sense of shared sacredness amid diversity. Festivals became grand affairs of cultural exchange. In cities like Alexandria and Persepolis, multi-faith celebrations featured music, dance, and storytelling from every corner of the empire. Citizens of different ethnicities wore their traditional garb proudly, yet shared communal rituals that celebrated unity in diversity. Social structures evolved alongside this religious tapestry. Citizenship expanded beyond birthright, embracing loyalty to shared values of harmony and learning. Intermarriage between Greeks, Persians, Egyptians, and others was common, producing generations that embodied the empire's fusion. Women, in particular, found new opportunities. Influenced by Persian traditions of royal women's political power and Greek intellectual life, women rose as patrons of the arts, scholars, and even local governors in certain regions. While patriarchal norms persisted, this blending allowed for more nuanced gender roles than either culture alone had previously permitted. Trade guilds and scholarly circles became hubs of social life. Merchants traded goods and ideas, while philosophers debated ethics and governance in vibrant public spaces. The Helleno-Persian Code of Law, a fusion of Greek democratic principles and Persian royal edicts, provided a framework for justice that balanced individual rights with communal responsibilities. Despite these advances, tensions simmered beneath the surface. Not all citizens embraced the cosmopolitan ideal. Some regions resisted cultural blending, clinging to older ethnic identities. Periodic uprisings erupted, often fueled by local leaders invoking nostalgia for a purer past. Yet, the empire's mechanisms for governance and justice often turned conflict into dialogue. Local councils included representatives from multiple communities, mediating disputes and fostering cooperation. The shared languages of Greek and Aramaic provided tools for communication and negotiation. Education continued to be a unifying force. Schools taught not only reading and writing, but also ethics, science, and the arts. Philosophers like the fictional Helena of Babylon and Demetrius of Persepolis penned treatises advocating for tolerance and intellectual curiosity, inspiring generations. This flourishing of multiculturalism influenced neighboring civilizations. Rome, expanding westward, adopted many Helleno-Persian cultural elements, religious festivals, architectural styles, and legal concepts. Farther east, India's Mauryan and subsequent empires engaged in diplomatic and cultural exchanges, enriching their own traditions. The legacy of this empire's social and religious synthesis challenges our understanding of ancient identity. It shows a world where difference was not a cause for division, but a source of strength. Where faiths coexisted not merely in tolerance, but in vibrant dialogue. Where culture was not a barrier, but a bridge. As we near the conclusion of this journey through an alternate past, we must ask, what lessons does this mosaic hold for us today? Could such a tapestry of faith and culture offer answers to the challenges of our own fractured world? In the story of a Persia that conquered Greece, only to be transformed by it, we find echoes of a future still possible, a world woven not from uniformity, but from the rich, complex threads of shared humanity. If history had unfolded with the Persian Empire conquering Greece, then blending rather than erasing their cultures, what kind of world would we live in today? Would the lines that divide East and West have blurred into a vast continuum of shared knowledge, faith, and governance? Would the ideals of democracy, philosophy, and empire have merged into a singular vision, one of unity in diversity rather than conflict and conquest? As we've journeyed through this alternate reality, we've seen the vast potential of synthesis, how the clash of Persia and Greece could have birthed a cosmopolis, a universal city of culture, science, and tolerance. A world where Alexander's dream was not of domination, but of connection. Where the great library at Babylon stood alongside the agoras of Athens. Where Zoroastrian priests debated alongside Greek philosophers. Where roads and trade networks knitted continents into a tapestry of ideas and goods. Yet, this world was fragile. The very differences that enriched it also seeded tension. The ambitions of generals, the push and pull of identity, the ever-present specter of rebellion. All reminders that empire is a delicate balance between power and respect, control and freedom. So, would you want to live in such a world? One where borders are defined by dialogue rather than walls. Where empires rise not by the sword alone, but through the power of ideas. Where the legacy of conquest is measured not in ruins, but in bridges? Or would such a world feel foreign, uncertain? A place where the familiar stories of democracy, philosophy, and freedom took a different shape, one less recognizable. History, after all, is a river with many possible tributaries. The choices of kings, generals, and common people ripple across centuries, shaping realities that sometimes diverge wildly from what we know. This what if, the Persian Empire conquering Greece and forging a new civilization, reminds us that the stories we inherit are not inevitable. They are one of many paths. They challenge us to imagine how culture, power, and identity might have evolved differently, and in doing so, challenge us to reflect on our own world. What lessons can we draw from a past that never was, but could have been? How might understanding the possibilities of unity through diversity inspire us to build bridges across the divides of our own time? I invite you to share your thoughts and reflections in the comments. How do you see this alternate history shaping the world? Would you want to live in the empire of the sun and the spear? Or is the story of free Greece, with all its flaws and triumphs, the truer inheritance? Thank you for joining me on this journey through the shadows of history, where fact meets imagination, and where the past whispers possibilities for the future. If you enjoyed this deep dive into alternate history, please like, share, and subscribe. Let's keep exploring the what-ifs that shape our understanding of history and humanity. Your thoughts and comments help keep this conversation alive. Until next time, stay curious and keep imagining.